The mountain air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers as Melody Harrison carefully documented the rare specimen before her. The delicate purple petals of the previously undiscovered plant species swayed gently in the Montana breeze. At 32, she had already made a name for herself in the botanical research community, but this discovery could change everything. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the remote meadow. Melody knew she should pack up and head back to her research station, but something about the plant's unusual cellular structure demanded more investigation. Just one more sample, she told herself, carefully extracting a leaf with her sterilized tweezers. The first sign that something was wrong came when her tablet screen began to flicker. Then came the silence, an unnatural quiet that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the grass. Melody slowly stood, her knees creaking from hours of crouching. That's when she saw them. 3 massive figures at the edge of the meadow, their silhouettes unlike anything she'd ever encountered. They stood upright like humans but were much larger, their bodies covered in what appeared to be some kind of armor that shifted colors to match their surroundings. Their heads were elongated, with features that seemed to blend primate and feline characteristics. Melody's scientific mind kicked into overdrive, cataloging details even as her heart hammered in her chest. The beings moved with incredible grace despite their size, covering the distance between them with frightening speed. She thought about running but knew it would be futile. Instead, she stood her ground, clutching her tablet like a shield. The tallest of the 3 stepped forward, raising what appeared to be some kind of device. A soft blue light emanated from it, washing over Melody. She felt a slight tingling sensation as the beam scanned her body. The being's eyes, a striking gold color with vertical pupils, studied her with an intelligence that sent chills down her spine. Biological match confirmed, a deep, resonant voice emerged from one of the creatures, the words somehow translated into perfect English. Subject displays optimal genetic markers. Melody found her voice, though it quavered slightly. I'm Dr. Melody Harrison, a botanical researcher. I mean no harm. Her scientific training helped her maintain composure, even as her mind struggled to process what was happening. The leader, she assumed it was the leader based on its more elaborate armor, tilted its head in what seemed like curiosity. We know who you are, Melody Harrison. We have been watching your work with great interest. Before she could respond, a low humming filled the air. Above them, the air itself seemed to ripple and distort, revealing the massive form of a spacecraft that had been cloaked. The vessel was organic in appearance, its surface reminiscent of iridescent scales that shifted colors in the fading daylight. You will come with us, the leader stated, not as a threat but as a simple fact. Your expertise is required. Melody's mind raced through her options. She thought about the emergency beacon in her pack, the satellite phone that could call for help. But as she looked at these beings, she realized that human assistance would be useless against their advanced technology. More importantly, her scientific curiosity was already overwhelming her fear. Will I be allowed to return? She asked, proud that her voice remained steady. The creatures exchanged looks, communicating in a series of subtle gestures and low frequencies that she could barely perceive. The leader turned back to her. That will depend on what we discover together. A beam of light enveloped Melody, and she felt her feet leave the ground. Her research materials floated up with her, at least they were considerate enough to let her keep her equipment. As they ascended toward the ship, Melody caught one last glimpse of her beloved mountains. The sun had finally set, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. She wondered if she would ever see Earth again, and if this was how humanity's first official contact with alien life would be recorded in history. The last thing she saw before the ship's hull enveloped her was her precious plant specimen, its purple petals still swaying in the evening breeze, unaware that it had just played a role in one of the most significant moments in human history. Inside the ship, Melody found herself in a chamber that seemed alive. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and the air had a strange, sweet quality that made her feel more alert. The three beings stood around her, their armor now retracted to reveal their true forms, a fascinating blend of primate and feline features, with sleek fur that seemed to shimmer with metallic highlights. "I am Ratan," the leader finally introduced himself. "You are now aboard the Nexarian research vessel Evolutionary Cipher. Your expertise in botanical genetic manipulation is of great interest to us, Dr. Harrison. But more importantly, you possess something in your own genetic code that we have been searching for across many worlds." The journey through space lasted what felt like days, though Melody's sense of time had become distorted in the ever-lit chambers of the Evolutionary Cipher. Her initial fear had given way to fascination as Ratan and his companions, introduced as Science Officer Lyra and Security Chief Theron, showed her around their vessel. The ship itself was a marvel of biotechnology, its systems seamlessly integrated with organic components. Living tissues formed computer interfaces, and neural networks ran through the walls like veins. Melody's botanical expertise helped her appreciate the sophisticated symbiosis at work, though the technology was far beyond anything she could fully comprehend. "Your understanding of genetic manipulation, particularly in plants, is impressive for your species' current development stage," Lyra commented while showing Melody their research laboratory. The female Nexarian's movements were more fluid than her male counterparts, her golden eyes holding a keen intelligence that made Melody feel like she was being constantly evaluated. The lab itself was unlike anything Melody had ever seen. Instead of traditional microscopes and testing equipment, they had quantum imaging devices that could examine DNA in real time, showing the dance of genetic code in three-dimensional displays. Living tissue samples floated in suspension fields, maintained in perfect stasis for study. "Why me?" Melody finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "There are thousands of geneticists and botanists on Earth with more experience." Ratan, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "We chose you because of your unique approach to cross-species genetic transfer. Your work on developing plants that can adapt to extreme environments showed particular promise. But more importantly, your own genetic profile contains markers we've been searching for." Before Melody could ask what he meant, the ship's living walls pulsed with new patterns, indicating their arrival at their destination. The view screen activated, revealing a planet that took Melody's breath away. Unlike Earth's blue and white marble appearance, this world was a swirling masterpiece of purple and green, with rings of crystalline debris that sparkled like diamonds. "Welcome to Nexus Prime," Theron announced, his deep voice carrying a note of pride. "The cradle of our civilization." The descent through the atmosphere revealed a landscape that defied Melody's expectations. Massive structures rose from the forest floor, but they weren't buildings in the traditional sense. They were living entities, grown rather than built, their surfaces covered in what appeared to be a combination of metal and organic tissue. The city pulsed with bioluminescent light, its architecture following patterns that reminded Melody of natural growth formations. As they landed, Melody noticed something else that struck her as odd. While the Nexarians she'd met were clearly evolved from primate stock, she saw other varieties of their species moving about the city. Some were more ape-like, others more feline, and some seemed to blend characteristics of both in different proportions. "Your people seem quite diverse," she observed carefully. Lyra's expression shifted in what Melody had learned was their equivalent of a smile. "We believe in guided evolution, Dr. Harrison. Each variation you see represents a different path of genetic development, all living together in harmony. It's one of the reasons we've been studying Earth with such interest." They led her to a vast chamber within one of the living structures, where dozens of Nexarian scientists worked at various biological research stations. At the center of the room stood a tall, distinguished-looking Nexarian whose fur had begun to show signs of age, turning silver at the temples. "Dr. Harrison," he greeted her, his voice carrying authority and wisdom, I am Chief Scientist Chorus. We have much to discuss about the future of both our species. The revelation came during Melody's third day on Nexus Prime. She had been working with Lyra, analyzing genetic samples from various Earth species they had collected, when Chorus entered the laboratory with a holographic display that changed everything. What you're looking at, he explained, activating the display, is a comparison of genetic markers across multiple species from both Earth and Nexus Prime. Notice anything unusual? Melody studied the rotating DNA strands, her eyes widening as she began to understand the implications. These sequences, they're almost identical. But that's impossible unless we share a common ancestor, Chorus finished her thought. Now you begin to understand why we brought you here. The laboratory fell silent as Chorus expanded the holographic display, showing a complex web of genetic relationships spanning millions of years. Melody's hands trembled as she traced the connections between Earth's primates and the Nexarians, her mind struggling to process the implications. We were not always as you see us now, Chorus explained, his golden eyes reflecting the soft glow of the display. Our ancestors were much like your great apes. But while your planet's evolution took a natural course, ours was accelerated by outside influence. Lyra stepped forward, adding to the explanation. Approximately 3 million years ago, our world was visited by beings we now call the Seeders. They saw potential in our primitive ancestors and began a program of genetic enhancement that spanned thousands of generations. The same beings visited Earth, Melody deduced, her scientific mind racing ahead. But they didn't intervene with our evolution. Why? Rattan, who had been silently observing from the doorway, entered the room. Earth was designated as a control group. A baseline to measure against their experiments on other worlds. But now that experiment has reached a critical phase. The holographic display shifted, showing a disturbing pattern of genetic degradation. Melody recognized it immediately from her work with plant genetics. It was the kind of cascade failure that could devastate an entire species. Our enhanced evolution came with a price, Chorus said gravely. We've reached the limits of our genetic stability. Each generation becomes slightly less viable than the last. Within a few centuries, our species will begin to fail. Melody felt a chill run down her spine as she began to understand why they had brought her here. You need human genetic material to stabilize your genome. We're your closest genetic relatives who still maintain natural evolutionary stability. Yes, Lyra confirmed, but it's more specific than that. We need individuals with particular genetic markers that you possess. Your work with cross-species genetic transfer in plants caught our attention because it showed an intuitive understanding of genetic stability that mirrors our own research. How many others? Melody asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How many humans have you taken? The Nexarians exchanged glances before Chorus answered. You are the 7th. The others are here, working with different research teams across our world. Each was chosen for specific genetic markers and scientific expertise. Anger flared in Melody's chest. You had no right to take us without consent. We're not specimens in your laboratory. We understand your anger, Rattan said softly, but we're running out of time. The genetic degradation is accelerating. Without a solution, our civilization will collapse within generations. Chorus activated another display, showing a massive underground facility. This is the Genesis Chamber, where we've preserved genetic samples from our entire evolutionary history. We believe that by combining specific human genetic sequences with our archived material, we can create a new, stable genome for our species. But we need your help, Dr. Harrison. Your unique genetic makeup, combined with your expertise in genetic transfer, makes you essential to this project. Melody stared at the displays, her mind racing. The scientist in her was fascinated by the challenge, the potential to save an entire civilization. But the human in her was horrified by the ethical implications. And if I refuse to help? Then we continue our research without you, Lyra said matter-of-factly. But know that we're not the only ones aware of the genetic connection between our species. There are others, less benevolent than us, who would exploit this knowledge. At least with us, you have the opportunity to help shape the outcome. A soft chime echoed through the laboratory, and new data began streaming across the displays. Melody recognized genetic sequences similar to those she'd been studying in her plant research, patterns of adaptation and resistance to environmental stress. Consider this, Cora said, gesturing to the new data. Your work on Earth focused on helping species adapt and survive in changing conditions. Here, you have the chance to do the same on a scale you never imagined. Yes, we brought you here without consent, and for that, we can only ask forgiveness. But now that you're here, now that you understand what's at stake, will you help us? Melody looked around the laboratory, at the faces of these beings who were, in a very real sense, her distant cousins. Their methods were questionable, but their need was genuine. And if what they said about others knowing of this genetic connection was true. Weeks passed as Melody immersed herself in the Nexarians' genetic research, but she never stopped watching for an opportunity to learn more about her situation. During her time in the laboratory, she had carefully mapped the facility's layout, noted the security patterns, and most importantly, gathered information about the other human captives. Late one night, while analyzing genetic samples, she received an unexpected visitor. Dr. James Wong, a quantum physicist from Singapore, had managed to slip away from his own research team. His presence confirmed what Melody had suspected: the other humans weren't as cooperative as the Nexarians had implied. "They're not telling us everything," James whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "I've been tracking their quantum communications. There's another group involved, calling themselves the Preservers. They're opposed to any genetic modification of their species." Melody's hands stilled over her workstation. "How did you access their communications?" "Their biotechnology responds to human brainwave patterns in unexpected ways," James explained. "They don't realize we can partially interface with their systems. There's a resistance movement among the younger Nexarians, led by someone named Verix. They believe the genetic modifications are destroying their connection to their evolutionary heritage." Before they could discuss further, footsteps approached the laboratory. James quickly slipped away, leaving Melody with troubling new questions. Over the next few days, she began to notice signs of the divide among the Nexarians. Younger members of the species often displayed subtle gestures of defiance toward the elder scientists, and conversations would abruptly cease when humans entered a room. The breakthrough came during a routine power fluctuation. The living walls of the facility dimmed momentarily, and in that brief darkness, Melody's terminal displayed a message in human text: "Meet us in the lower archives." Midnight. When midnight came, Melody found her way to the archives, heart pounding. She found not only James but also the other human captives: Dr. Rita Patel, a neurobiologist; Professor Thomas Schmidt, a geneticist; Dr. Maria Gonzalez, an evolutionary biologist, and two others she didn't recognize. With them stood a group of younger Nexarians, led by a striking figure with jet-black fur streaked with silver. "I am Verix," he introduced himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "And we believe what our elders are doing is wrong." Verix explained that the Preservers believed the genetic degradation was not a flaw but a natural return to their species' original state. The Cedars modifications were finally wearing off, and instead of fighting this process, they believed they should embrace it. "The elders fear devolution," Verix said, "but we see it as evolution correcting an ancient wrong. We cannot keep kidnapping humans to maintain an artificial state of being." "We can help you escape," a female Nexarian named Naira added. "But we need your help in return. The data you've gathered, the research you've done, it proves that our natural genetic state is still viable. We need that evidence to convince others." Melody shared a look with her fellow humans. The choice seemed clear: but the implications were staggering. If they helped the preservers, they would be taking sides in what could become a civil war. If they refused, they might never see Earth again. The decision was made for them when alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Security Chief Theron's voice echoed through the corridors. The humans have accessed restricted data. Find them. Now or never, Varric said urgently, activating a hidden panel in the archive wall. Your research has been copied and encrypted. We'll cover your escape, but you must move quickly. As chaos erupted in the facility, Melody and the other humans followed their young Nexarian allies through a network of maintenance tunnels. The living walls pulsed with alarm signals, and they could hear security forces mobilizing above them. They emerged in a landing bay where a sleek transport vessel waited, its biological components already humming with pre-launch sequences. As they rushed toward it, Melody heard Lyra's voice behind them. Stop. The science officer stood at the bay entrance, flanked by security forces. You don't understand what you're doing. The fate of our species hangs in the balance. Varric stepped forward, placing himself between the humans and the security forces. No, Lyra. You don't understand. Our species survived millions of years before the Cedars came. We'll survive this too, but not by enslaving others. The standoff in the landing bay crackled with tension as more Nexarians arrived, both security forces and young preservers. Melody could see the conflict playing out across generations, the elders desperate to preserve their enhanced evolution, the youth fighting for the right to return to their natural state. But something else was happening. The ship behind them had begun to pulse with an unusual pattern of bioluminescence, and Melody felt a strange resonance in her mind. The other humans felt it too, their expressions showing a mix of wonder and confusion. The ship is responding to them, Chorus's voice cut through the chaos as the chief scientist emerged from the crowd. Just as our systems have been responding to their presence all along. We thought we needed their genetic material, but we've been blind to the truth. The elderly Nexarian approached slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. The Cedars didn't just modify our ancestors, he continued. They created a connection between our species, a biological recognition that we're only now beginning to understand. The humans aren't here to save us from genetic degradation, they're here to show us that we never needed saving. Melody stepped forward, her scientific mind racing ahead of her fear. The plant specimens I was studying on Earth, they were showing signs of spontaneous genetic adaptation. That's why you were watching my work. Yes, Chorus nodded. Your research was discovering what we should have seen centuries ago. Life finds a way to balance itself. Our genetic degradation isn't a failure of evolution, it's evolution itself correcting an artificial intervention. Security Chief Theron lowered his weapon, his expression troubled. But the projections show our species will change dramatically. We'll lose much of what we've become. We'll adapt, Varric countered. Just as our ancestors did before the Cedars came. And we'll do it naturally this time, without kidnapping other sentient beings or forcing our own people to maintain an artificial state. The humans and Nexarians stood in tense silence as the implications sank in. Generations of fear about genetic degradation, centuries of desperate research to prevent it, and the truth had been there all along in the very process they were fighting against. Lyra stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her loyalty to the old ways. The human presence has accelerated our understanding. Perhaps that was the real purpose, not to provide genetic material, but to help us see what we were too afraid to accept. You'll let us go? Rita Patel asked, still wary despite the apparent breakthrough. Chorus looked at the assembled Nexarians, reading the changing mood. Yes, but we hope some of you might choose to stay, not as captives, but as colleagues. There's still much we could learn from each other. Melody felt the resonance with the ship growing stronger, an almost musical harmony between human consciousness and Nexarian biotechnology. Your species isn't dying, she said with sudden clarity. It's preparing for its next step in evolution. And somehow, the Cedars knew our species would help you understand that when the time came. The security forces withdrew, and the younger Nexarians began helping the humans board the ship. Each person would choose, return to Earth or stay to witness and document this remarkable evolutionary journey. Either way, the relationship between humans and Nexarians would never be the same. As Melody made her decision, she thought about the purple flower she'd been studying when they found her. It had adapted to its harsh environment not by forcing change, but by allowing natural processes to guide its evolution. Sometimes, she realized, the most advanced solution was to simply let nature take its course. The ship hummed with life around them, its systems responding to the unique harmony between human and Nexarian biology. As they prepared for departure, Melody looked through the view screen at the gathered crowds below. Young and old, traditional and revolutionary, all were beginning to understand that evolution wasn't just about survival or advancement, it was about finding balance. In the end, 3 humans chose to return to Earth, while 4, including Melody, decided to stay. They would become the first official ambassadors between their species, helping to document and understand the remarkable transition the Nexarians were about to undergo. As the transport ship lifted off with those returning home, Melody stood with her fellow scientists, both human and Nexarian, watching it disappear into the purple-green sky. The genetic research would continue, but with a new purpose, not to prevent change, but to understand and embrace it. Evolution isn't just about becoming more advanced, she said to Varix, who stood beside her. Sometimes it's about remembering who you were meant to be. The young Nexarian nodded, his eyes on the horizon where the ship had vanished. And sometimes, he added, you need an outside perspective to see the truth about yourself. Above them, the crystalline rings of Nexus Prime sparkled in the alien sunlight, a reminder that the most beautiful things in nature often came from the most unexpected changes.